Steve and David, you're all on the same team. You want to make a livable community. So where are the barriers? Where's the block? Who's the problem?
Can I have a crack first?
Yeah.
I reckon if you could do one thing, and it would be, I reckon that the utopia for local governments, the thing you could change, and people kind of really didn't quite notice, is to get rid of minimum parking rates Australia-wide. What happens then? A, it gets the attention of the development community, because then they can do a genuine market assessment of what they can and can't develop. They can build as many parking spaces as they want. If they can't sell it, they're not going to build it. You get value then in getting people to live closer to your centre. It's more difficult to park in the middle. Slowly, over 10, 20, 30 years, get more and more difficult to park. And people won't quite notice why, but it'll happen really slowly. So there'll be value in moving closer. Once there's value in moving closer, it's more viable for a developer to do a 6-storey development, an 8-storey development, a 12-storey development closer to your centre. Then it becomes more valuable for people to start to compete for quality retail street space, because all of a sudden there's a lot of people in there. And it's not really all of a sudden, it's happened, slowly it's evolved. People have snuck in there. 10 years ago, an empty street's now a full street. But people say, oh, there's a chicken and egg argument here about when do I start doing up public transport, when do I put density in, or when do I take parking up. That is ridiculous. It's not a chicken or egg, it's the rooster, and parking is the rooster. If you fix that over the time, you won't have to be a bad guy. Over time, the market will fix your centres.
Okay, Dave or Steve?
Yeah, I was just going to say, building on from that, the greatest roadblock we find is the existing traffic manuals, and the issue with the traffic manuals is that, in a quick sort of piece of history, but obviously GIs are coming back from the war. A lot of them are engineers in America. They write the green manual. The green manual is effectively photocopied and Xeroxed around the world, and today some form of that green manual is sitting in most councils. Most of them don't recognise pedestrians as a legitimate form of transport, and despite all of the vision statements and principles at a higher level of council, every standard is prioritising the vehicle and not recognising any other forms of movement or the role in the street to build place capital, be a place of exchange, and all these other sorts of things. So the simplest thing that could be done is to rewrite the manual for the 21st century, because whilst those manuals continue to exist, we're trying to reinvent the city, but at the same time still drag standards along from a century which we're saying those outcomes are no longer appropriate.
And I think to support that, there's good standards that do exist that can be applied. It's not like this hasn't already been thought through. And I agree 100%. I mean, PI insurance, indemnity insurance, is what drives a lot of traffic engineers at the end of the day. And they're driven by what is an Australian standard. And if you can unlock that and challenge that, and you can and you do, but the reality is if they've got to fall back to that, it's very hard to make massive change. I think the other thing is there's a big roadblock between forward planning that tries to say that you're going to have a certain product or a park or something in a specific location, which may not be built for 15 years and may not even reflect without any consideration of actually how people are going to utilise those places. I think a lot more robustness and flexibility as a result in the planning and zoning systems would actually allow good designers to come in and actually say, okay, then, well, what is the appropriate density in this location, and can we actually push the right pieces to happen in the right places? And that's invariably what you're actually battling up against. You come up with a great idea to do something that requires some density, but then you look at the zoning and you can't do it. You look at a structure plan that was done 15 years ago and it required a neighbourhood connector to be somewhere, and you're like, but it doesn't serve a role anymore, and it's a massive challenge to undo that. Just close out on that. I think we are turning a corner though. The younger folks who are coming into their early 20s, even mid-20s at the moment, aren't getting driver's licenses as readily as they used to. They don't really want to drive. They're certainly not owning the number of cars they had before. They're quite happy to catch public transport, and they're going to places that do have public transport. And so if we can capitalise on that, I think you can actually sell product homes that at least disconnect the parking from the home, shares the parking, say, with retail so that you can deal with peak periods and stuff. And that's the start to, I think, a process where we can actually get somewhere.
Great, thank you, David. All right, so a question. You've got one here, Glenn?
Glenn, I don't know if this is on. Glenn Mabley, I'm an endocrinologist who actually came in this morning from Blacktown Hospital because I was on call, and we had about 4 or 5 people with diabetes admitted. I had to sort out this morning. We did a survey through our emergency department, and we find now that 30% of our patients in hospital have diabetes. And Thomas Astelbert, I know, is here from University of Western Sydney. We've been doing some mapping, and you've probably got 3 times the prevalence of diabetes in our patch out in Western Sydney compared to around where we are sitting today in a city in the beaches area. And you see on the nice streets and the great designs going in here, it's becoming a more walkable place. I'm just wondering how people that like us that work in diabetes management, how can we work with developers in our patch to make a difference? Because our health system is being totally overrun now by chronic disease. And with 30% of our patients in hospital having diabetes, we're aware that we should be doing something, but we are not urban designers. We don't know much about all of these things, but how can we work together?
Can I tell you a quick little story? Be very quick. In Blacktown Council, I worked on a project, Ropes Crossing, which is got nicknamed Robbers Crossing at some point. But anyway, challenging area surrounded by public housing, no footpaths, nothing. We went and built a community. We actually fought to try and get a narrow street built, which narrow there was 7.5 metres wide, curb to curb. We had to do it as a trial because Blacktown standard was 9 metres for some reason. We built the street. We asked the traffic engineer to come out, have a look. I'll give you his name, Nadeem. They don't let me meet him anymore. I think there's a restraining order. Anyway,
is this a good story?
No, it's a good story. So anyway, he comes and he says, no, I can't come and have a look at it until we actually build the houses. So okay, a year later the houses are built. Comes and has a look. He said, well, yeah, I guess this street works. Well, can we build the rest of them like this? No, our standard is the 9 metre standard. And so I think my point is, look, the developers are actually keen because I'm going to put the greedy hat on again and say, look, if we can build a narrower reserve, put more of it into footpath and verge and less into pavement, it saves us a lot of money. And so, if we'd gone with a 7.5 metre street, we would have saved 1.5 metre in road reserve. 1.5 metres times 100. You're talking $50,000 to $100,000 worth of extra income for the developer. So we're motivated to create good places that work but that are efficient. And where we come unstuck is the local authorities' inability to actually want to have change. And they're really concerned about, and they've got valid concerns. Their concern is they're the asset holder. We need to be able to hold that asset in perpetuity. If you've got a street that's coming through a neighbourhood centre, I need to be able to allow for that to be widened at some point because they think the traffic numbers will be there and they don't want to have to demolish houses and so on and so forth. Mm. So there's a lot of overreaction, a lot of looking ahead to a future that doesn't exist. So I would I would get the council guys together, the staff together, and do a presentation and explain what's going on. They need to understand that.
And how important is the health argument in arguing for, more footpaths and cycle paths and things like that?
I still think this, I'll get into trouble when I say it, this pseudo-safety argument still outweighing the health argument. So I say, look, I'm going to prevent the 1 in 1 million chance that there'll be a crash because this street's too narrow. I don't want to have to go and defend that. It's going to sound really mean. This diabetes thing, that's 20 years off. The problem I'm caught, and I understand why you shake your head, but my concern is that's the mindset. Saying, look, this long-term health thing, I can fight that another day, but if someone has a crash here tomorrow, I won't know what to do. Having said that, of all the crashes that happen in streets all around Australia, there's hardly any, and look, I'm sure there are some, but we couldn't find any when we did the complete the complete streets book were because I got the reverse curve wrong or the radius wrong. It's because I was pissed, I wasn't paying attention, I was changing the station on the radio. That's what causes car crash. Not any of this stuff that, you know, people say, oh, I don't want to have to go to the coroner's court to defend. No one wants to go to coroner's court to defend a crash. But the fact of the matter is, there's 99.99999% chance it wasn't your fault. You're better off worrying more about how people walk, how you stop them getting overweight, how you stop them getting diabetes, heart disease. That's how you save people's lives as a street maker.
Okay. All right. Sorry, was there another comment?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say the health dimension, it is particularly important. And I mean, I think we're very cognizant of that in our work. We know that in Australia at the moment, current children being born and perhaps the first generation actually have their life expectancy wound back because of these issues, which is completely disgraceful. And I think how we can make a difference, because it is a multifaceted issue, is ultimately through advocacy, like groups like the Premier's Council for Active Living, to change the legislation to create what we want. And I mean, it's ironic. Planning was originally created in the interest of protecting people's health, so we separated noxious land uses during the Industrial Revolution. We've now created something called car-dependent sprawl that's making people sick again, and we need to collectively put the business case to change the legislation and perhaps prohibit something that is making us sick. And it's not to say you can't have a suburban lifestyle or suburban house, but it's to do it in a way that's sustainable, and we've lost track of that at the moment.
Thanks, Steve. That's a good comment. Okay. Other questions?
Thanks for those comments. Michael Sheridan, I'm with the Centre for Urban Design within Roads and Maritime Services. I think there's been a lot of really good comments today. Stephen, I think you've put forward two essential challenge areas, and I think this is where, for me, excellent. One was to do with technical issues. The other one is mindset change. Stephen, you've put forward nothing other than challenges for mindset change, and that's awesome, because that's what I work within and what we do. I also believe that the work that we're doing within RMS is some very good guidelines for both, for a lot of councils to pick up on. A couple of years ago, we won the inaugural Australia Award for Urban Design for our urban design policy, Beyond the Pavement. And what we do is, I've sometimes likened to being like the good bacteria within the organisation.
It's a very good phrase.
But it is a matter of working together, and some of us are brave to come and stand up and say we're engineers, and others who aren't engineers are friends of engineers. I guess the point being is that how do we affect this change without obviously ostracising each other and working together? I think that's one of the key things. But Stephen, I wonder if you or any others want to question this question of technical challenge. I think is a beauty, because it's never black and white. I mean, where I work and where the companies we have working for us in projects is challenging those peripheral questions. It is speed. It is the design curve radii, blah, 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 whatever. But there are grey areas, and it is setting those national policies, Austroads, etc., that have to be delivered. And boy, I wouldn't want to be a project manager today, because you've got to do everything and meet all these milestones. So it is, how do we keep going with questioning those technical manuals, guidelines, requirements? So if you've got a comment on that.
I'll have a crack first. The secret to it is separating street design from road design. They're two completely different things, and they generate value to the community in two completely separate ways. So if you've designed a street where no one's going to crash, which is a good thing, and it flows nice and quickly, and no one gets delayed, and so in the binary approach that sometimes you get stuck in, it's only a tick or a cross, it gets a tick. But it's of no value to the community if all those shops are vacant because the setbacks are too big and the trees are set too far away from the street to have any impact on it, and it's just an ordinary place. It's no value to the community to have a tick that does that. On a road, there is value. You know, people going from one place to the other, you know, if it takes freight twice as long to get there, then it's a problem. You know, if people are delayed on these long trips for, you know, that's why you build a road. And you can get into an argument whether you should or you shouldn't, but if you're going to build them, then their economic value to the community is to move people from one end to the other. But the street generates its value from edge activity, and so the design standards should promote that. If for whatever reason you can't get a car down whatever's left after you do all those good things, then out they go. They were the last in. We were first. So we have to have a different set of codes. And this is happening. I mean, there's a new street design someone sends me from somewhere, a street design code from somewhere around the world about once a month. You know, everyone's onto this fact that they're different. But quite often what they do, I'm just about to start writing a new one over in New Zealand because they're one of the currently, when it gets to any design technicality, it refers to a road design manual. So they just can't win. They say, well, look, we'd like to do this, but the minimum lane widths and that. A good street design manual will have maximum lane widths, not minimum. It will have minimum footpath widths, not maximum. You know, we've got it the wrong way around. Those two art forms have to be separated, and then we have to develop the discipline. And in 60 years of doing that, like the GI guys have had, then that technical stuff will be bedded down. But if we don't get stuck into that, and people are, and you know, Stockland have got their own internal version of it, people, because they know that the street design developed from road design standards is wrong. But we just got to get an agreement on, well, okay, if they're wrong, then what's right? And when in doubt, don't go back to the bloody green book, because we know that's wrong already. So
Okay.
we've got to move forward.
Do we have another comment from the panel?
Yeah, I think just quickly too on the standards, there is a real opportunity with pilot initiatives or temporary interventions to actually trial the change before people buy into it for the long term. Just a couple of quick examples. We're doing a project where we wanted to narrow the bus lane from 3.7 down to something more reasonable. Got told just saying, well, a bus can never drive down a lane that width, even though in some of the older parts of the suburb, there goes the bus down the street. And when we delved more deeply with that stakeholder group, we found out that the issue wasn't the width per se, but it was the fact that the bus contracts had been done in a certain way that it would slow them down a bit, which would then compromise their optimisation of service. It would result in a rolling variation through the network that financially was unfeasible. But again, it was only through working in partnership with a broad group of stakeholders did we actually understand the crux of the problem. And now there's a long-term strategy 2.5 years from now that when the bus contracts are redone, they've actually monitored through a trial street what that impact on the service is, and the new contract will be negotiated accordingly at a much simpler end of the scale. Doing a job up in Darwin, council was completely sceptical, and this is not Darwin Council, Palmerston Council, that you could ever do a 3 metre curb radius and the world wouldn't end. So we actually got some paint and a couple of witches' hats, and we actually got the council oars and some of the key technical officers to trial it. And they'll drive around the car park in circles, but then we trialled it on a little intersection for the town, and the evidence collected over a couple of months gave them the confidence to sign off on changing the long-term standard because there hadn't been crashes, cars were actually moving a bit more slowly, and people were just saying, you know what, the ambience of this intersection, it feels better. We can't quite put our finger on it, but it's working for us as pedestrians and people walking through the town centre. So I think those pilot initiatives can get very quick responses and buy into something that might otherwise be difficult.
I suspect what actually helps these things happen, and in my own experience where we've had the greatest success, is when you've had a whole of government approach. When you actually get the planner with the fire guy, with the traffic guy, with the economic development guy and so on, all sitting in the room together, looking at a plan for a place and understanding that the public realm is really something they've all got a piece of responsibility for, that's when these other guys can actually look at the traffic guy and say, well, hang on, narrowing that street or putting a signalised intersection there is actually more important than your level of service for that intersection and putting a roundabout. The education guy can say, well, my school kids need to be able to walk across there. And when you actually get them talking to each other, it's not the developer going, could you please approve my plan, please? It's them saying, well, what's the place you want to build? This can actually happen more readily in Canberra, funny enough, but we've had good experiences also. And I expect your experience at Palmerston would have been driven by a more holistic whole of government approach.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a good point. Other questions? Okay, we've got one here and then one up here.
Susan Thompson, Professor of Planning at the University of New South Wales. Thank you for a very interesting panel and obviously a lot of interesting discussion as a result of your presentations and questions. I'd just like to raise 2 points, if I may, that haven't come up already. And one is actually picking up on Glenn's comment about how can we work better together and how can we engage local government, how can we engage state government more in these issues, particularly those of us who are focused more on the planning, engineering side, maybe not so interested in health, is to make the link between human health and environmental sustainability. And environmental sustainability is well on the agenda of planners now. I know we don't use the CC words anymore, climate change, but unfortunately they are still around.
You can use climate resilience.
Climate
resilience.
Okay, great. Climate resilience. But there's a lot of work now in an area called co-benefits, which shows if we act in a climate resilient way, we're going to bring about significant health improvements. So that just is one comment I wanted to make, and something that hopefully people can pick up on. And the other thing, I just want to raise an issue, hasn't been raised yet, and use the sharing word, and it also picks up very much, Stephen, what you talked about, cultural change. I think we've got a long way to go in terms of the culture of sharing spaces. I'm a walker, and I nearly get run over by the mammals, the middle-aged men in lycra, although they're not all men. Occasionally they're nice young ladies who are tearing past at the rate of knots on recreational shared pathways, and there are a lot of people fabulously wanting to be on these spaces, on these paths. We've got to be more cognizant of others around us and sharing. And I'm also hoping that developers are going to start to share a little bit more and be perhaps a little bit less greedy in terms of allowing a lot more shared car spaces. We've just had an interesting example of refusal of a developer that's certainly not present in this room, who flatly refused to provide lots of shared car spaces in a massive development that's happening in inner west of Sydney, which is already massively trafficked, very, very congested. And the community was saying, we want lots of car share spaces so many of us can then give away our own private cars.
To clarify, you mean car share for like go-get?
Yes, for that sort of, for schemes for that sort of thing. And I understand that isn't something that then will get the developer money. Because
can we have a quick response to that? Because then we'll have one more question over there.
I'll just quickly say about the health thing. Look, I think it is creeping in perhaps more than we think at the edge. And look, I'll go back to the statement I made at the very start. I think, like, my quest to make better, more human places and places for exchange and gathering, the oil crisis didn't do it for me. I think that health will be the Trojan horse. If we make healthy places, we'll have good places.
Sorry.
Yeah, just quickly on the sharing dimension, I think one of the real challenges of complete streets is that there's still a priority even amongst well-intentioned people of getting people from A to B as quickly as possible. So look, we've embraced bike lanes, and yet we've actually just taken the vocabulary and language of highway engineering and squeezed them down onto a bike lane, where it's really still a focus on getting people from A to B, albeit more sustainably, rather than a holistic overview of the role of the street and how we share it. And I think as we move forward together, how we perhaps become a bit more like Europe in the sense of its shared space and streets, rather than perhaps like North America, which is continuing gung-ho in laying out the green lane, is a real challenge, and one that's worth embracing.
I think that shared space too, we're in a particularly difficult time right now where there's a little bit of infrastructure provided, but nowhere near enough to serve everybody. And you actually can't, there isn't enough or safe enough streets for the mammal to actually want to use the road. I'm one of those, and I happily use the road every day over a shared space because I feel more comfortable challenging the cars than dealing with people, because that's not fair to them. I don't want to, they've got every right to that space. I think though, so I think we're at a sort of a difficult point where we've got a little bit of infrastructure, but nowhere near enough, and nowhere near enough the right attitude, from drivers and so forth. I think on the co-benefit space, looking into what shared value can deliver is a really great emerging area of accounting and of financial benefit. And I think particularly in academia, if there's more work can be done in understanding in financial terms, what is the shared value, what is the uplift of the impact of building something a certain way, that would help give a lot of ammunition to what you know. We're working on a bid at the moment, and one of the things we're talking about is we've got recycled water accessible, so we want to make it as lush as possible and do everything we can to try and reduce the ambient air temperature on hot days by about 4 degrees. Now, we don't have any data to actually say that's actually going to reduce the air conditioning demand on the house by this much, which is going to save everybody this amount of money every day. But but we know anecdotally it will. If we had more of that kind of information, be it fewer cases of diabetes, that sort of evidence that can then start to say, well, actually putting that footpath in is actually going to generate 10 times its value, then you would do it every day of the week.
Okay. All right, we're running up to the morning tea, so I have one last question or comment.
Crosby, Lorimer, Clauston Landscape Architects. David, you've almost stolen my thunder on that one, because I was going to pick up 2 points which Stephen was making about, first of all, about culture change and technical, but you actually demonstrated, Stephen Moore, you actually demonstrated the third one, which I think we could learn some lessons from our health professionals around here in built environments, is actually using and collecting data and using evidence. And I thought, Stephen, you demonstrated that very well, and it's one of the biggest challenges for consultants in this field is the life cycle of consultancy is such that unless the data is actually already there, it's very hard to quickly get at it. You require interviews and so forth. And I just wondered, from the panel's perspective, to what degree they find that a challenging environment is actually the absence or presence, if you like, and the availability of data.
I'll have a bit of a go. Look, I often get asked that question, as not perhaps in the same context, but there is more and more data worldwide on the impacts of low density car-based development and health. So it's not unheard of, and it's spasmodic, and it gets to you in bits and pieces. But there's stuff there to collect. You don't have to go and get your own. One of the mistakes we sometimes make, though, is to say, look, I want to make a more livable place. But the traffic engineer says I have to have this intersection like that because it saves 4 seconds and there's 20,000 people, and over 50 years he saved $80 million by putting in a left turn slip lane, and all I want is a better place. I've got no argument. Can you give me some stats? I said, look, as soon as you start that argument, you're getting down to his shallow end of the gene pool.
It's true.
Just tell him, I don't care about that, mate, you're not measuring the right thing. What I want to measure in that suburb with all your stupid left turn lanes is how has the level of diabetes gone in the last 10 years? What is the economic turnover? How many people walk? That's the stuff to measure. When the guy starts, oh yeah, but level of service and delay and 2 seconds over 100,000 years at $40 bazillion a second, just go, mate, you're not even in the wrong meeting. That's not what we're talking about. It's this holistic, that's the stuff you got to get to. So don't fall into that trap of making your argument about making people happy about 0.06 of a second over 50 years. So when you get into that into that data gathering area, make sure you gather the right stuff. Don't fall into that, because the engineer measures this, then that's what I'm up against. That's not what you're up against. You've got to measure how much of a better place you make and say, how does your 6 seconds make these people smile?
All right,
agree with that 100%.
we might end on that note, because that's actually quite a good one, isn't it? I mean, like we get caught up in the micro detail of measurements of things that aren't important to us, but it is part of the argument, and how do we turn that argument around? So at this point, I'd like to ask you to thank the panel and all the speakers.